How's it going, everybody? KG here. Today I got the LG C5, the Sony BRAVIA 8, and the Samsung S90F. These are all mid-range OLED TVs, and what I'll be doing in this video is giving you my real-time analysis as the TVs are right in front of me, and then I'm going to cut this up in post and only post certain segments of this recording. I'm going to show you game mode with a few tweaks to the settings because out of the box, the game mode is just horrible on a lot of these TVs. All right, so let's see what it looks like out of the box, and then I'll show you what the problem settings are, why it looks this way out of the box. So now that the settings are reset, you can really see that LG and Samsung have these wild settings out of the box that not a lot of people are going to want to use, but some people may like them. So it's just up to you whether or not you like this out of the box look. LG and Samsung are definitely on the cooler side with the color temperature in mind. Sony really looks great out of the box. It looks similar to what the professional mode looks like on their TVs. Sony does a really good job here with their game mode. All right, first let's take a look at the Samsung. So what's the problem here? The problem, first of all, is that the color is a little bit too high, so we're going to want to turn that down eventually. But the HDR tone mapping is set to active. We're going to want to set that to static. Contrast enhancer is set to high. We're going to want to set that to off completely because we don't like the way that makes our image look. So after setting your contrast enhancer off and your HDR tone mapping to your liking, I prefer static. Next, on this particular TV, I change it to custom color space and then switch it to BT 2020 color. And then I switch the color space back to normal. And that way I'm in the normal 2020 color space. And then I change the color tone, which is the color temperature. I use warm 2. A lot of people like warm 1. I really just say go with whatever your personal preference is here. I can't stress enough that you should just set it to whatever you want to set it to. And don't really have to listen to what I'm saying, but I'm just showing you how I do it, so you get an understanding of why I want the picture to look like this. So you can see that my game mode basic and my game mode off look kind of similar, but still basic is going to give me the look that I want. And that's because this is going to allow you to set your system settings up properly because it uses the HGIG guidelines. And we'll be doing the same thing on the LG now. We're going to switch our dynamic tone mapping to HGIG. If you have dynamic tone mapping on, you can see what it does to the picture. It does pretty much lift everything. So setting it to HGIG will follow the HGIG guidelines. I can't stress this enough though, that HGIG is going to rely on the game to have good HDR support. Otherwise, maybe there's situations where you want to use dynamic tone mapping on, but unfortunately, as I shown, it can create problems and change the picture entirely. So now you'll notice that we got the image looking very similar on all the TVs across the board. This is exactly what we want, but you might notice that the Sony still looks a little bit different than the other two TVs, and you might actually think you prefer the Sony in a lot of cases, and that's because it does have dynamic tone mapping always on, but it is more controlled, a little bit more nuanced than the dynamic tone mapping features on the Samsung and the LG, because using the dynamic tone mapping on or the active for the Samsung is going to essentially do a very similar thing in really over brightening the picture and is going to destroy a lot of the details in the image and kill a lot of the creator's intent, where the Sony doesn't do that. In fact, it does a really good job of looking quite similar to the other TVs in a lot of cases, but I've noticed that on games that don't have great HDR support, the Sony is going to look a lot better than both the LG and the Samsung because it does have the dynamic tone mapping always on to help. When the games are not great in HDR, they're just going to look great on the Sony. By now, I'm sure a lot of you guys noticed that the Samsung S90F really sticks out with bright colors in mind, and brightness in general. It holds on to it better than both of the WOLED TVs throughout this play session of Mario Kart World. And this game definitely seems like it ventures outside of the P3 color space into some BT 2020 colors at times, because it does seem like it has a very wide color gamut. It's just going to be a clear advantage for the QD-OLED. And you could take a look at the vents right here. The color brightness difference is just immense. And the way that the lava is coming across on the S90F is just so much more impactful than it is on the other WOLED TVs. and even some of the brighter colors inside here, you can definitely see there's a huge difference. One thing that I've noticed with the LG OLED TVs over the years, that when you're in game optimizer compared to outside of game mode, you lose a lot of color brightness. And I'm showing you an example of this here. It's pretty clear and I know you can see it. So that is definitely a bummer. You are going to lose some luminance going from game mode to outside of game mode with a lot of TVs, but this is pretty egregious and I've never seen anything quite like it is on the LG. There is a workaround, but this is going to come at a cost. You will lose HGIG with this workaround if you want to put it into other modes and play that way. You'll also have a small latency hit as well. This may be harder to see on YouTube, but what I see with the Sony TVs constantly is that they are going to be the clearer, sharper picture. Honestly, way more clarity in general than both the LG and the Samsung. And it's not a negative thing. It's not like it's over sharpened. It feels like it is organic and it should look that way. And it's really hard to explain. You have to be in front of the TVs to really understand it. The best way I can explain it is that it feels like I'm playing on a higher resolution, on a higher texture pack. Like if I was playing on a PC version of this game. And you know, a lot of these games are soft, not by intention, but because they have to be. Because of console restraints, you are constantly playing games that should be in 4K, but they're really actually in 1080p upscaled to 4K or 1440p upscaled to 4K. So you will have those softer looking pictures. And when it comes down to the Sony, cleaning that up is not a bad thing. And it's a very welcome thing, actually. So really cool thing that Sony does here that the other TVs just don't have quite the grasp on. Now this does come with a little bit of an input lag hit because they're using more processing, but you really don't feel the input lag difference between the Sony, the LG, and the Samsung. So for the real feel, I'm not noticing a huge difference. Here you're seeing SDR, and you can notice SDR does look more impressive on the S90F. In my opinion, it's a clear night and day difference between both of the WOLED TVs that we see. All right, back to HDR. Outside of the game optimizer features like black stabilizer and white stabilizer, there's not very much reason to want to get the LG over both of these TVs, especially the S90F, because if you think about it, you're getting similar HDR behavior with the Samsung and the LG, not the performance of it. Obviously, the S90F's HDR performance is higher than the C5, but the behavior is going to be similar in the way that you have a mode that does abide by HGIG guidelines, which is going to be nice, but you also have the overbright and dynamic tone mapping mode, which a lot of people do like. Now, I really wish both of these TVs had what Sony had with their dynamic tone mapping options. So more options with your dynamic tone mapping would be a very welcomed thing. So a lot of you guys just want advice. Which one should you buy? And it really depends on what you're looking for. It can seem that there is a clear winner with the S90F, especially in a lot of scenes that we're seeing, because you have a lot of strengths with the S90F. You have the peak brightness, the color brightness. You have just everything going for it with HDR in mind when it comes down to games that are implemented properly. And when they are implemented properly, it looks fantastic. But when they're not implemented properly, you're met with a situation where if you have everything side by side, a Sony WOLED can look better than the S90F in those situations. And I'm not gonna lie, that feels weird to say, but it's the actual truth. Even though the BRAVIA 8 does often feel like an incomplete WOLED TV, it still does have clarity and great HDR in certain games that just outshine both TVs, and it is really weird to see. So I have no doubt in my mind that there are going to be people that pick the Sony because it can look good in most games. I cannot deny this though. The S90F to me is the more impactful TV. It's the TV that really sticks out in high brightness moments. It really does come alive with the high color brightness. At times it can feel like it's on another level of this price bracket. Doesn't really belong in this price bracket. It feels like a flagship OLED TV with the brightness that it's delivering. So yeah, the S90F is an impressive TV, and I think it's going to be the one that most people pick for their gaming venture between these three. If you're a PC gamer, you're probably going to want to take the Sony off this list because it doesn't have 144 Hz support. That's just something I want to mention because I'm really judging image quality first and foremost with this presentation here. That's what I'm looking for when I'm looking at the game mode quality. And for me, if I'm just judging off of game mode picture quality, game mode impact overall, it's going to be the S90F at number 1, the Sony BRAVIA 8 at number 2, and the LG C5 at number 3. There was a clear technology difference also when looking at these three TVs. The QD-OLED really did stand on its own with the brightness and the color brightness for sure, but also in just how clean the image was overall. There was a lot of color banding with the WOLEDs in mind, both the Sony and the LG. Unfortunately for the Sony, this one doesn't have smooth gradation, so you can't clean it up. And the LG never worked with their smooth gradation in their game mode, so you can't clean that up either. So it's a really unfortunate thing. There's also the issue of tinting. Up close, there is some tinting with the LG C5, but it's not as bad as when you go off angle. When you go off angle, there is a green tint. And when you go off angle with the Sony, there's also some tinting issues there as well. The Samsung QD-OLED doesn't have these issues, but QD-OLED does have a little bit of an ambient black level raise. If you are in a brighter room, if light hits it directly, this could cause problems. But for the most part, I don't think most people will endure this. I hope this video was helpful to you, and if it did help you make a buying decision, please consider buying that TV on one of my affiliate links in the description. Thank you for the support, and if you have any questions at all, leave some comments below. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please subscribe to the channel, and I hope to see you in the next one.